What do I need to get started with landscape photography? I get this question a lot, and today I'm going to answer it. 5 things. Just 5 things. Welcome to my channel. Here we talk about photography, and I make videos just like this one where I share some landscape photography gear tips that anybody can follow. So if you're here for the first time and you love photography like me, it might be a good idea to subscribe. Although I don't talk a lot about gear in this channel, the most frequently asked questions are actually related to gear. Which camera should I buy? Which is the first lens should I buy? And of course, what do I need to get started with landscape photography? It might seem obvious that you will need a camera. What is not obvious is which camera to choose, which camera to buy. There are so many different cameras in the market, so many brands. And although I don't really care about the brand you pick, I do care about which camera you're going to choose. Let's cut the chase. If you don't have a camera, and you do have a budget, I would pick a full-frame camera. Let me explain why. So on which criteria should you make your decision? In my opinion, for landscape photography, there are 3 main criteria: image quality, resolution, dynamic range. You need a camera with a sensor that can handle noise, a sensor that will provide you with a flexible RAW file that will be easily processed in Lightroom or whatever other software you will use for your edit. I mentioned dynamic range. What is the dynamic range? In photography, the dynamic range of a scene is the range of light intensities which goes from the brightest to the darkest part of any given image. And to be just a little more technical, let's say from the highlights to the shadows. This range, these light intensities are measured in f-stops, let's say stops. The better is your sensor, the more your sensor will be able to retain information and details in the highlights and in the shadows. A less capable sensor instead will blow out your highlights, which will become pure white, and crash the shadows, which will become close to black. And imagine this: the human eye has the capacity, the ability to recognize up to 30 stops of light. So 30 stops of dynamic range, while the best cameras in the market, the best sensor, might only recognize 16, 17 stops. My Nikon D810, which is a full-frame camera sensor, I think has 14.6 stops of dynamic range, which is very, very good. So in general, a full-frame camera has better dynamic range than a camera with a very small sensor. At the same time, nowadays there are APS-C, so cropped sensor cameras that have similar dynamic range capabilities. I also talked about resolution. And the resolution is important because as a landscape photographer, we have the ambition, when we capture something beautiful, to print it. And landscape photography cannot be printed small. And if we have the ambition to sell our photography, of course, it is important to invest on a camera with a high resolution. My recommendation is to pick a camera with a dynamic range of at least 14 stops and a resolution of at least 24 megapixels. Let's go a little deeper into landscape photography now. As you know, the best light to take landscape photos is either the blue hour or the golden hour. The blue hour happens right before sunrise and right after sunset, while the golden hour happens right after sunrise and right before sunset. Why am I telling you all this? These are typically very low light conditions. A full frame sensor normally can handle these low light conditions a lot better without introducing unwanted noise in your images. And this is another good reason why I would pick a full frame camera for landscape photography. And in order to keep your budget friendly, you could buy a used camera, especially if your local camera store is able to tell you who was the owner and you can see how many shots have been taken with that camera. My recommendation is don't buy new, especially the first camera. Don't buy it new. I believe that a Nikon D810 has a life of 250,000 shots, and maybe in 5 years' time, I had this camera for 5 or 6 years, whatever it is, maybe I took 12,000 shots, maybe. I don't think I did. The second thing that you need once you have a camera is to get a proper lens. The first lens that I would buy if I was going to start landscape photography right now, it would be this lens right here. If you've been following my videos for a while, you know that I love these 20mm f1.8. This lens is very versatile. With an aperture of f1.8, it can be good for astrophotography. The 20mm lens, in my opinion, is not too wide, but is wide enough for landscape photography. The prime lens is incredibly sharp. And another great thing compared to a zoom wide-angle lens is that it is small and light. But maybe the best thing is that it's not expensive at all. A 20mm f1.8 like this one cost $716 brand new. I did mention in previous videos that I love prime lenses because they force me to move. They force me to scout around, move forward, move backwards, while sometimes with the zoom lens you can get lazy, place your camera on the tripod and just open or close your zoom. While with the prime lens, because you are forced to move around, you will discover new and different vantage points. This happens to me all the time because I did these mistakes myself, because these did cost me money, and because since I got this lens, I never felt I was missing a zoom wide lens. Trust me on this, don't waste your money, invest on a good wide-angle prime lens. Also remember that the quality of your images will always depend from the worst piece of gear that you are using. So if you have a very good full frame camera, but then you buy a very cheap lens, the quality of your images will be the quality of that cheap lens. Does it make sense? The third piece of gear that the landscape photographer will need to start his journey is a very comfortable camera bag. This is what I'm using right now. This is a Shimoda Design Action 30, I think. I used the 40, I used the f-stops gear camera bags. It's important that the straps are comfortable. It is important that the back is comfortable. I like camera bags where you can put your gear in from behind. These will give security to the camera. from the elements, your camera gear will be protected. What I love about this camera bag in particular is the possibility to adjust the length of the bag depending on your height. Most of the times in landscape photography, we need to hike to get to our spot, to our destination. We need to walk around. It is important to be comfortable. Don't under-evaluate this factor. If you're not comfortable, you will not get to the spot. If you don't get there, there's no photo. And also when choosing your bag, don't go crazy, don't go too big. That's what I did. At first, my very first bag was gigantic. Then I realized that less is more. If I wanna hike longer, not only the bag needs to be comfortable, but also if it's too big and I'm carrying too much stuff, I will still feel the weight, I will still cut my hike short. So make sure that your camera bag can fit more than just one lens, but don't go crazy. You don't need too many pieces of gear to take great landscape photography. Number 4, I think you know it. The fourth piece of gear that, in my opinion, you should buy as a new landscape photographer is the tripod. Yes, you need a tripod for landscape photography. You cannot work without a tripod if you are doing astrophotography. You cannot work without a tripod if you're doing long exposure photography. You cannot work without a tripod if you're doing time lapses. But also in normal, let's say normal, everyday landscape photography, you have no idea of how much the tripod will help you to properly compose your photographs. In my opinion, this is a factor that dramatically will improve your composition. And that means that your photography will change. Your photography will improve. Because no matter what gear we are using, how good is our camera, how many megapixels do we have in our sensor, none of this matters if we are not able to compose our images properly. The tripod will help us to take the time to compose properly. How many seconds can I hold my camera still, framing my composition and making sure that any unwanted elements will sneak in my photo? I'm preparing a video about composition in landscape photography, and you will understand how important and why, in my opinion, it is very, very difficult to compose without a tripod. So especially if you are a beginner photographer, I would say you will benefit even more from the use of a tripod. Which tripod? I talked about this in previous videos. You will find in the description below the gear that I use. You don't have to use what I use, but make sure that it's a strong, steady tripod, and at the same time it is not too heavy, because otherwise at the end of the day you will decide not to carry it with you, and so it's a waste of money. At number 5, what is the last thing that you will need to start your landscape photography adventure? Well, it's not a piece of gear. You need a post-processing software. I use Lightroom. You can use Capture One, Luminar, whatever. I don't really care, of course. But again, if you just bought a camera with a great dynamic range, you will need to shoot in RAW. But unfortunately, the RAW file needs to be processed. Otherwise, it's just a very, very flat image. And the images that you take with your iPhone will actually look better. So you will need to shoot in RAW, and you will need to process those images. To do that, you will need a software. I use the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription plan, which is $9 a month. No matter what software you will choose, make sure to establish a proper post-processing workflow. Now, if by chance you have some extra budget, the 6th thing that I would recommend to buy is a polarizer filter. The polarizer, if properly used, I made a video about this in the past, you should see the card, can add some pop to your photos. It can also play as a neutral density filter because it cuts 2 stops of light. So with the polarizer, you could also start practicing some short, long exposure photography. It's a great tool to have in the bag. You don't need it right away, but if you purchase it, make sure that it's good quality, make sure that it's glass. Don't put a piece of plastic in front of your lens, otherwise the final quality of your image will be compromised. This is all for today, and I hope that this video and these gear tips will be helpful if you are in the market for new gear, and especially if you are starting a landscape photography journey. No matter what gear you will pick in the end, I really hope that you will start this journey. Landscape photography is therapy. Landscape photography will force you to spend more time in nature. It's a fantastic hobby for anyone, and hopefully we will be able to be out freely in nature very soon. As usual, thanks a lot for your support. Thanks for liking this video. Thanks for sharing it with your friends. Leave me your comments. Check out my t-shirts, and thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.